A 67-year-old man walks into a financial advisor's office in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's got $347,000 to his name, a paid-off condo worth maybe 200 grand, and he's terrified. The advisor pulls up a spreadsheet, runs the numbers, and says those 9 words that have launched 1,000 panic attacks. You'll need at least 1.2 million to retire comfortably. The guy leaves, goes home, and starts Googling how to make quick money at 67. 6 months later, he's bought a rental property in a market he doesn't understand, taken out a home equity loan, and is now investing in some startup his nephew told him about. Here's what actually happened to that money. The rental property sits vacant for 8 months. The startup was a crypto project that folded in 3 weeks, and now he's got $170,000 left, plus debt. All because some advisor used a formula from a textbook that was written before smartphones existed. Now you're asking yourself the obvious question. How much money do people actually retire with? Not the fantasy number from the financial industry, not the nightmare scenario from the news, the real number. The middle number, the number that lets you wake up at 65 and not panic. I'm going to show you exactly what most Americans have when they clock out for the last time. Why almost everything you've been told about retirement savings is mathematically insane, and the 3 numbers that actually matter. This gets weird fast. Let me tell you about 2 different guys who retired in 2023. Same age, same city, totally different outcomes. First guy, we'll call him Marcus. Spent 32 years at a manufacturing plant in Ohio, never made more than $68,000 a year. Retired with $211,000 in his 401k, a house worth $140,000 that he'd paid off in 2019, and a pension that pays him $1,800 a month. Add in Social Security, and Marcus brings in about $4,200 a month. His expenses are $2,900. He plays golf twice a week, sees his grandkids every Sunday, and takes a cruise to Alaska every other year. Second guy, we'll call him David, worked in tech sales in Austin, peak salary of $185,000, retired with $890,000 across various accounts. Nice house, still has a mortgage of $3,000 a month, car payments on 2 vehicles, private school debt he took on for his daughter's graduate degree. David's monthly nut, just to break even, is $7,200. His Social Security and a small annuity cover about $3,100 of that. He needs to pull $4,100 a month from his investments, which at a 4% withdrawal rate means he needs $1.2 million just to maintain his current lifestyle. He has $890,000. Marcus is fine. David is screwed. This is the central lie of retirement planning. The number in your account means absolutely nothing without the number on your expenses. But the financial industry loves account numbers because account numbers are how they sell you products. They can charge fees on $890,000. They can't charge fees on your mortgage is too high. Think of retirement savings like a water tower. The industry keeps telling you to build a bigger tower, more water, higher capacity, but nobody asks how many holes are in your pipes. You can build a water tower the size of the Chrysler building, but if your pipes leak 3 gallons for every one you use, you'll still run dry. Marcus has a small water tower and tight pipes. David built a massive tower, then punched holes in every pipe he could find. Now let's look at what the actual numbers say about American retirees. And I warn you, this is the part where most people either get depressed or stop believing the data. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances is the gold standard here. They survey thousands of households every 3 years and actually dig into the real numbers, not just what people claim on some online poll. Their most recent comprehensive data shows that the median retirement account balance for households headed by someone 65 to 74 years old is approximately $200,000. That's the median, meaning half of retirees have more, half have less. But here's where it gets interesting. That number only counts households that actually have retirement accounts. About 40% of American households have $0 in any dedicated retirement account. Nothing. Nada. If you include those households in the calculation, the true median retirement savings for all Americans approaching retirement age drops to around $90,000. $90,000. That's it. That's the number that half of Americans are below when they hit 65. An AARP survey conducted in 2024 found that 1 out of every 5 adults aged 50 and older have absolutely nothing saved for retirement. Not a little bit. Not enough. Nothing. Zero. These are people 5, 10, 15 years away from the traditional retirement age, and they haven't set aside a single dollar. Now, you might think, okay, but those are probably people who never worked, or had some major life disaster, or made terrible choices, and some of them did. But a lot of them are people like a woman I'll call Patricia, who I read about in a case study from the Employee Benefit Research Institute. Patricia worked for 34 years as an administrative assistant, never unemployed for more than a few weeks, raised two kids as a single mom, put both through community college, paid her rent on time every month, retired at 67 with $4,200 in savings because every time she got a little ahead, something happened. Car broke down, kid needed help, roof leaked, the water tower kept getting water, but the pipes kept draining it faster. Here's the question that should be haunting you right now. If the median is $90,000 and 20% of people have literally zero, how is anyone surviving retirement? The answer is three things, and none of them are what the financial industry wants to talk about. Number one, Social Security. The average monthly Social Security retirement benefit as of late 2024 is approximately $1,900. That's $22,800 a year. Not glamorous, but if your house is paid off and you're not supporting kids anymore, it's survivable in a lot of the country. For a married couple where both worked, you're looking at maybe $3,500 a month combined, which is $42,000 a year. Again, not wealthy, but not starvation either. Number two, home equity. About 80% of Americans 65 and older own their homes. Of those, roughly 60% have paid off their mortgages. That's a massive expense that simply disappears for most retirees. The financial industry hates talking about this because they can't charge fees on a paid-off house. But a 65-year-old with a paid-off $300,000 house and $90,000 in savings is in a fundamentally different position than a 65-year-old renting and sitting on $90,000. Number three, lifestyle compression. This is the polite term for older people spend less money, not because they're frugal saints, but because they stop doing expensive things. They're not commuting, they're not buying work clothes, they're not paying for daycare or kids' activities, they eat out less, they travel less, their world physically shrinks, and so does their spending. Now you might be thinking, okay, but that sounds miserable. Working your whole life just to shrink your world and survive on Social Security? That's not retirement, that's a slow motion decline. And you're not wrong. But here's the uncomfortable truth the financial industry doesn't want to acknowledge. For most of human history, this was retirement. You worked until you physically couldn't, then your family took care of you, or you lived very simply until you died. The idea of 30 years of leisure funded by investment returns is a historical anomaly that emerged in the mid-20th century and is now slowly unraveling. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember how I said only 3.2% of Americans retire with $1 million or more? That number comes from Federal Reserve data, and it's worth dwelling on for a second. 97% of retirees never hit that magic seven-figure number that every financial advisor quotes as the baseline for a comfortable retirement, and yet somehow most of them survive. Many of them are fine, some of them are genuinely happy. How? Let me introduce you to the concept I call the gap. The gap is the difference between what you think you need and what you actually spend. Most people, when asked how much they need to retire, give a number based on their current income. I make $80,000 a year, so I need $80,000 in retirement, but that's insane. If you're making $80,000 right now, you're paying payroll taxes, you're saving for retirement, you're paying a mortgage, you might be supporting kids. Strip all that out, and your actual spending might be $50,000. A financial planner I know did an experiment with 50 clients over age 60. He asked each of them how much they needed to retire. Then he asked them to track every dollar they spent for 3 months. The average gap between their needed number and their actual spending was 34%. These weren't stupid people. They were successful professionals. They just had no idea where their money went because they'd never been forced to look. There's a parable here. A business consultant is hired to analyze a manufacturing plant. He walks around for 3 days, clipboard in hand, timing workers, measuring output, interviewing managers. At the end, he presents his findings. I've identified 17 inefficiencies that are costing you $2.3 million a year. The plant manager nods and says, "Great. What's it cost to fix them?" The consultant says, "About $800,000 in new equipment and training." The manager says, "We don't have $800,000. The consultant says, "Then you don't have a $2.3 million problem. You have an $800,000 problem that you're choosing not to solve." Retirement planning works the same way. You don't have a "how do I get to 1.5 million problem. You have a "what's my actual gap" problem. The first problem is impossible for most people. The second problem is solvable. Let me give you a concrete example with real numbers. Consider a couple, both 62, living in a medium-cost city like Charlotte, North Carolina. They make a combined $130,000 a year. Their financial advisor told them they need $1.2 million to retire. They have $480,000 saved. Panic, right? Let's look at their actual numbers. Mortgage payment, $1,800 a month. but they'll have it paid off by 65. Property taxes and insurance, 600 a month. Food, 800 a month. Utilities, 350. Cars, they own both, just maintenance and insurance at maybe 300 a month. Healthcare, this is the big one, about 1400 a month until Medicare kicks in at 65, then maybe 400 a month with a good supplement plan. Entertainment, travel, miscellaneous, let's be generous and say 1000 a month. At 65, with the mortgage gone and Medicare active, their actual monthly expenses drop to about $4,500. That's $54,000 a year. Social Security at 67 will pay them a combined $42,000 a year if they wait until full retirement age. That means they need to cover $12,000 a year from savings. At a 4% withdrawal rate, they need $300,000 to cover that gap. They have $480,000. They're fine. Not fly first class to Europe every year, fine, but pay bills, visit grandkids, occasional nice dinner, fine. The 1.2 million number was based on replacing 80% of their pre-retirement income, which was never going to happen because 40% of their pre-retirement income was going to things that disappear in retirement. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content, otherwise YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Now let's talk about where the $1 million number actually comes from, because the origin story is genuinely wild. The 4% rule was popularized by a financial planner named William Bengen back in 1994. He looked at historical market data and concluded that if you withdraw 4% of your portfolio in your first year of retirement, then adjust that amount for inflation each year, your money has a high probability of lasting 30 years. It's a solid rule of thumb based on actual historical data, including the Great Depression and several major recessions. But here's what happened next. The financial industry took that rule and worked backwards. Want 80,000 a year in retirement? 4% of 2 million is 80,000, so you need 2 million. Want 60,000? You need 1.5 million. Want 40,000? You need 1 million. Notice the sleight of hand here. They took a withdrawal rule and turned it into a savings target, then used that target to sell products. 401k management fees, IRAs, annuities. Robo-advisors, every single one of those products makes more money when your account balance is higher. A 1% fee on $1 million is $10,000 a year. A 1% fee on $200,000 is $2,000. The incentive is to make you feel like you need the biggest possible number. But Bengen himself has said repeatedly that the 4% rule is a starting point, not a law of physics. In good market conditions, you can often withdraw more. In bad conditions, you might need to withdraw less. It's a framework for thinking, not a guarantee. Here's a joke for you. A financial advisor, an economist, and a retiree walk into a bar. The financial advisor says, "I can tell you exactly how much money you'll need for the next 30 years. The economist says, "I can tell you the probability distribution of possible outcomes based on historical data." The retiree says, "I just want to know if I can afford another beer." The economist and advisor spend 3 hours arguing about the first two questions. The retiree orders another beer. He dies happy. The economist and advisor are still arguing. The point, and I know you see it coming, is that precision is a mirage. You cannot know what the markets will do, what healthcare costs will be, what inflation will look like, or how long you'll live. Anyone who tells you they can calculate your exact number is lying or deluded. The best you can do is build a range, stress test it, and adjust as you go. Now let's talk about the people who actually do retire with substantial money, because there's a pattern that almost no one talks about. The 3.2% who hit $1 million or more aren't necessarily the highest earners, they're the most consistent. A study from Vanguard looking at their 401k data found that the single best predictor of retirement account balance wasn't income, it was participation length. People who contributed steadily for 30 years ended up with far more than people who contributed aggressively for 15 years, then stopped, even if the total dollars contributed were the same. The math on this is actually stunning. Let's say you contribute $6,000 a year from age 25 to 55, earning 7% average returns. At 55, you have about $607,000. Now let's say you contribute nothing from 25 to 40, then contribute $12,000 a year from 40 to 65. Same total contribution amount, $300,000. But because you started later, you end up with about $630,000. Close, right? But here's the kicker. In scenario 1, you're done at 55. You can stop contributing entirely and still have $1.4 million by 65 just from growth. In scenario 2, you're still grinding at 65. Time in the market beats time in the market. It's a cliche because it's true. But it's also worth noting that the financial industry makes more money from people who feel behind, because people who feel behind make emotional decisions. They buy high-risk products, they pay for expensive advisory services, they chase returns. The entire "you're behind, here's how to catch up" industry is built on the anxiety that the steady savings industry created by quoting impossible numbers. Now, here's the problem. You might be thinking, okay, so I don't need $1 million, I just need to know my actual expenses and save accordingly. But there's a variable we haven't discussed that derails more retirement plans than any other: healthcare. A couple retiring at 65 has a roughly 50% chance that one of them will need long-term care at some point. The average cost of a private room in a nursing home is now over $100,000 a year. Assisted living averages around $54,000 a year. Home health aides cost about $27 an hour nationally, and that number is going up. Let me tell you about a guy named Howard. Howard retired at 63 with $400,000 in savings, a paid-off house worth $300,000, and a pension from his years teaching high school. By any reasonable measure, he was fine. Then his wife developed early onset Alzheimer's at 67. She lived until 74. In those 7 years, Howard spent everything: the $400,000 in savings, the home equity through a reverse mortgage. He eventually had to sell the house and move into a small apartment. The pension, which should have been his safety net, went entirely to care costs. He died at 79 with essentially nothing. This is the scenario that keeps financial planners up at night, and it's the one that almost no one wants to talk about because it feels unfixable. Long-term care insurance exists, but it's expensive, and the industry has a troubled history of premium hikes and denied claims. Medicaid will eventually cover nursing home care, but only after you've spent down almost all your assets. The system is designed to extract maximum money from families before providing any safety net. But you might be thinking, isn't this exactly why I need $1 million? To protect against this scenario? And the answer is sort of, but also no. Because here's the uncomfortable math. Let's say you need 5 years of nursing home care at $100,000 a year. That's $500,000. If you have $1 million, you're fine. If you have $200,000, you're not fine. But here's the thing. Most people will never need 5 years of nursing home care. The average length of stay in a nursing home before death is about 1 year. Only about 20% of people stay more than 3 years. So yes, $1 million provides a cushion against worst-case scenarios. But for most people, saving an extra $800,000 to protect against a 20% chance of a catastrophic expense is mathematically inefficient. You're better off buying long-term care insurance, or planning to self-insure up to a certain point and then relying on Medicaid, or structuring your assets in ways that protect something for the healthy spouse. The point isn't that you shouldn't worry about healthcare costs. The point is that save $1 million is a terrible solution to a complex problem that has better solutions if you're willing to think systemically. Now, I want to tell you about something that changed how I think about this entire topic. A few years ago, I read about a study from the Employee Benefit Research Institute that tracked actual spending patterns of retirees over a multi-year period. They found something unexpected. Retirement spending doesn't stay flat, it declines. Not just because people get more frugal, but because their physical capacity to spend money declines. In the early years of retirement, spending often goes up. People travel, fix up their houses, do all the things they couldn't do while working, then spending gradually declines through the middle years. And in the final years, spending drops sharply as people become less mobile, less able to travel, less interested in consumption. The 85-year-old who could spend money often can't remember why they wanted to. This matters because it breaks the entire replace your income model. If your spending naturally declines by 30 or 40% over the course of retirement, you don't need a portfolio that throws off the same amount of money every year. You need one that covers higher spending early and lower spending later. The math looks completely different. There's a company that studied this. They looked at actual retiree spending patterns and built a model that accounts for the spending decline. Their conclusion? The average retiree needs about 25% less than what traditional models suggest, not because they're being frugal, but because that's just how human aging works. Now, you might think, okay, but what if I'm the exception? What if I want to travel the world at 80? And sure, that's possible, but the data says you probably won't. Not because you can't afford it, but because at 80, most people don't want to haul themselves through airports and sleep in strange beds and eat restaurant food 3 times a day. The 75-year-old you has different desires than the 55-year-old you. Planning for the 55-year-old's desires at 75 is like buying a crib for a teenager. The need is past. Let me give you a mini case study that brings all of this together. I know of a couple, let's call them the Richardsons, who retired in 2019. He was 62, she was 60. Combined savings, $680,000. House paid off, worth about $400,000. No pension, just Social Security coming eventually. Their financial advisor ran the numbers and said they were short. They needed another $200,000 minimum to retire safely. They retired anyway. Here's what happened. First year, they spent about $70,000. Travel, home improvements, the works. Second year, pandemic. Spending dropped to $42,000 because there was nothing to do. Third year, about $55,000. Fourth year, $58,000. By year 5, they were settled into a pattern. Groceries from Costco, occasional dinners out, one big trip a year, hobbies that cost almost nothing. Their average spending settled around $52,000 a year. Social Security kicked in at $62,000 for her, $65,000 for him. Combined, it's about $43,000 a year. That means they need to withdraw about $9,000 a year from savings to cover the gap. At that rate, their $680,000 will last, basically forever. Even with modest returns, they're withdrawing about 1.3% a year. Their portfolio is actually growing. Were they undersaved? By traditional metrics, absolutely. By reality metrics, they're going to die with more money than they retired with. The advisor's model assumed they'd spend $70,000 a year for 30 years. Reality says they spend $52,000 a year, and that number is trending down. Now, to be fair, there's a survivorship bias here. I'm telling you about the Richardsons because it worked out. I'm not telling you about the people who retired with $600,000 and got hit with cancer diagnoses and market crashes and divorces. Those people exist. The question is whether the traditional model of save a million just in case is the right solution for those risks, or whether it's a one-size-fits-all answer that doesn't account for individual circumstances. Here's where I'll pivot to something that might actually be useful if you're watching this and wondering about your own situation. 3 numbers that matter more than your total savings. Number 1, your gap. Not your income, not your expenses, but the gap between what comes in and what goes out. Track every dollar for 3 months. Actually track it, don't estimate. You'll be shocked at what you find. Most people discover they spend 15 to 20% more than they think on things they don't actually care about. That's not a judgment, it's just how human brains work. We don't notice the small leaks, only the big ones. Number 2, your fixed versus flexible ratio. Some expenses are set in stone. Property taxes, insurance, basic food, healthcare. Other expenses are flexible. Travel, entertainment, eating out, hobbies. The higher your fixed expenses as a percentage of total spending, the more vulnerable you are to shocks. A retiree with $4,000 a month in fixed costs and $2,000 in flexible costs can adjust if things go wrong. A retiree with $5,500 in fixed costs and $500 in flexible costs is one healthcare bill away from crisis. This is why financial advisors tell you to pay off your mortgage before retiring. Not because it's mathematically optimal, but because it converts a fixed cost into zero, which gives you flexibility. Number 3, your Social Security break-even. This is the most overlooked calculation in retirement planning. You can claim Social Security as early as 62 or as late as 70. The difference is massive. Claim at 62, you get about 70% of your full benefit. Claim at 70, you get 124% of your full benefit. That's a 77% increase in monthly income for waiting 8 years. The break-even age where waiting starts to pay off is typically around age 80. If you expect to live past 80, and most people should, waiting is mathematically superior. But it requires having enough savings to bridge the gap, which brings us back to number 1 and 2. The pattern you should notice here is that none of these 3 numbers require you to hit a magic savings target. They're all about understanding your specific situation and making informed trade-offs. The $1,000,000 question is the wrong question. The right question is, what does my actual retirement look like, and what resources do I need to support it? But you might be thinking, this all sounds reasonable. But what about inflation? What about market crashes? What about the fact that everything costs more every year? And these are real concerns. Inflation has been brutal the last few years. Markets do crash. Healthcare costs are rising faster than general inflation. But here's the thing, $1,000,000 doesn't solve these problems any better than $500,000 does. If inflation runs hot, both portfolios lose purchasing power. If markets crash, both decline. The number in your account doesn't protect you from systemic risks. It just gives you a bigger buffer. The real protection against these risks isn't a bigger number. It's flexibility, the ability to cut spending if needed, the ability to work part-time if markets are down, the ability to downsize your house or move to a cheaper area, the ability to adjust A retiree with $300,000 in maximum flexibility is better off than a retiree with $800,000 in zero flexibility. There's a parable about this. Two farmers are preparing for winter. One spends all summer building a massive barn and filling it with grain. The other spends the summer building a smaller barn, planting different crops that mature at different times, and learning how to forage. Winter comes, it's longer and harsher than anyone expected. The first farmer runs out of grain in March and starves because he only knows one strategy. The second farmer makes it through because he had multiple sources of food and the skills to find more. The financial industry wants to sell you a bigger barn. And bigger barns are good, but diversified income streams and the ability to adapt are better. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. The boring truth is that consistent saving over a long period, combined with reasonable spending and some flexibility, works for most people. It's not glamorous, it won't make you rich, but it will let you retire with enough, which is all that actually matters. So let me bring this back to where we started. How much money do most Americans retire with? The median is somewhere between $90,000 and $200,000, depending on how you count. Only about 3% hit $1 million. And yet most retirees survive. Some even thrive. Not because they hit some magic number, but because retirement costs less than the financial industry wants you to believe, Social Security covers more than you think, and human beings are remarkably adaptable when they need to be. Here's what I want you to take from this. First, calculate your actual gap, not your income replacement ratio. Your gap. What do you actually spend and what will still be necessary in retirement? That number is probably lower than you think. Second, maximize flexibility. Pay off debt, keep fixed costs low, build multiple income streams if you can. The more rigid your expenses, the more vulnerable you are. Third, question every number anyone gives you, including me. The financial industry has incentives that don't align with yours. Advisors make money when you have more assets under management. Product sellers make money when you buy their products. The media makes money when you click on scary headlines. Your incentives are different. You want enough money to live the life you want, with enough cushion to handle the unexpected. That's it. The $1 million retirement is a marketing concept, not a mathematical necessity. Most people who hit it got there through decades of boring, consistent saving, not through brilliant investment strategies. And most people who never hit it still manage to retire just fine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go check my own portfolio and remind myself that stress doesn't add anything to returns.